Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's watch.
So what is that? Like, what happens?
It's just hard for me to like keep track of time. I can have like a bad memory sometimes. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's just something to be aware of.
It sounded like she was talking about a volitional dissociation, which people will engage in a sort of mindfulness, as I was saying. What she just said there has me thinking that it's actually the non-volitional type that is developed typically when children are 0 to 3, 4, and have experienced such terror and trauma moments that they develop a very quick toggle switch between being non-dissociative and dissociative. It's apparently available to children, or most children, that when they go through great terror, particularly chronically, they learn neurologically, it's not a conscious decision, that to cope, you have to dissociate, you have to separate yourself from reality. There's different ways of describing it. It's hard to put into words because we don't really have a way of describing it, and it's different for different people. One of the things that I think about sometimes is that scene in Get Out, the movie, and he is hypnotized, I believe, or drugged, and he's like, in the cinematography, he's like in the back of his mind looking through his own eyes, you know. I think that's how it was. Anyway, so it can metaphorically, it's not actually like that, but it can kind of feel that way. But the way that people describe it is that they will lose time, they will be very spacey. Most people, when they're dissociating, will not know they're dissociating, and then as they're coming out of it, they won't know, because the whole idea is that they're trying to avoid, and if your mind was conscious or focusing on it, then it would lead you to start thinking about what you were trying to avoid, which isn't helpful. So a lot of people that I work with who have dissociation will have other signs, and then I'll ask them about dissociation. I'll ask them about time and memory lapses or spaciness, or do you ever have people that tell you that you have another state that you go into, and they'll say, yeah, I do. And then we go down that road, and there's this huge blind spot that there's a lot of data around, but they either don't know how to think of it, or they're scared of it, or they've been avoiding it. Anyway, so talking about that. So she's aware of that, and it sounds like therapy has occurred. I don't know, which is good. And the problem with dissociation is that it's helpful when the child is young, but if it's done chronic, if it's resorted to chronically, if it needs to be resorted to chronically, then the individual for the rest of their life will have a very quick toggle switch that will kick in the processes of dissociation when it's not really called for. The individual will be safe, and they're an adult, and they're in full control of their lives for the most part. And something will remind them of the trauma, and the toggle switch, because when they were 3 years old, it wasn't helpful to stop and think, is this really important to dissociate from? It was just, just turn off. There's no good in being here, and you're 3 years old, so you don't really need to be here anyway. You don't have responsibilities. When you're 35, you do. You're driving a car, you're trying to have a conversation, you're trying to work, you're trying to parent your kids, you're trying to pay your bills. It's not helpful to turn off like that. And it can be really annoying and very disconcerting to think that you don't have control over your brain and it just turns off. It's debatable whether or not you can actually end that tendency. I don't approach clients with dissociation with that assumption. What I do, which is the gold standard of treatment, is to work on triggers and emotional regulation and awareness so that they can't, because typically dissociation, the trigger happens, say, on the scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being like the most distress. It typically will happen, say, around 5 or something. And often the individual will be, something happens and now they're a 3 and now they're a 4. But they're not paying attention to it because most people don't. And it's hard sometimes to notice when you're a 3 or a 4 for anyone, but particularly if it's a little scary, and then before you know it, boom, you're dissociating. But if we actually went back in time, there were precursors and indications that it was probably going to happen. And so at that point, if you do a regulation and you bring yourself down to a 2, then your mind won't kick into dissociation to cope, that sort of thing. Also, with chronic moments of safety and corrective experiences, you're less likely to ramp up to the need for dissociation if you have enough life. Because what can happen is people can experience the normal everyday stress of life, dissociate, which causes its own problems, and then that compounds with more stress. Whereas if you can get through what I find like a 3-month period without any dissociation, the body, I think, learns to adjust to raise the bar for dissociation, because it's like, oh, maybe life is safe and we've crested the hill and we don't need it as quickly. And just one way of seeing it. But anyway, so I don't know what exactly she's talking about, but she has a lot of indications based on her history that she has disclosed, which I commend her for greatly, that she has been through some of the worst trauma that someone can go through. And as a part of that, unfortunately, she also has retained that dissociative toggle switch into adulthood.
I guess.
Yeah. I wonder how I could help in that situation. Or what could is there anything?
Perfect response. Perfect. Well, another would be to validate and to listen and go, wow, tell me more. Or, I'm so sorry. But another one is there something I can do to help?
Thing I could do in that situation?
There's nothing really that like anyone can honestly do. I can handle things. You can't always like be there to like save the day or.
So part of her response is understandable, because it's not like if he did something nice, it would erase her dissociative tendency. But her response also seems to be in line with her avoidant attachment style, which is to not ask for help. And she's bucking the trend by even talking about this vulnerability that she has. So that's great. But it's really hard for avoidant people to ask for help or even respond positively when people ask them if they need help, you know? So there's that.
Her. And like, it's sweet that you want to be able to like do something or help or like whatever. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's my responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing everything that I can and everything that I know in my resourced way to work through that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like she's been through a fair amount of recovery. And yeah, it's important that she put both hands on the wheel and drive the bus herself. And it would be understandable and perhaps necessary if you're in a close relationship with someone that you work together as a team on either of your issues.
Do you think that would affect a relationship?
In what way?
In the negative way.
It's not necessarily affecting like my relationships at all. Maybe I'll forget something, but usually that's not the case.
I will say it's eerie that Alex looks like one of my good friends from childhood. He was the guy that taught me how to play guitar. He was the Kurt Cobain before Kurt Cobain. He dressed like Kurt Cobain. He played guitar like he had a guitar like Kurt Cobain, you know, because this is late 80s. So it's just to get a picture of him, and would joke around like Kirk Cobain. Anyway, it's just really eerie to see the profile. He looks so much like him. Maybe
I'll forget something, but usually that's not the case. Just like my childhood memories that I kind of like forget sometimes. But yeah, that's like my honest answer. Do you foresee that being an issue for you?
I don't know. It's tough because it's like not really in my control.
Yeah, I mean, they're having a real conversation. I don't think he really comprehends what she's telling him, which would be normal. I would just, if that's true, hope that he would just say, I guess I don't really know what she's saying. He seems to be interpreting it in a way that means it would automatically impact the two of them. So what it can do for preoccupied people, and maybe that's what's happening right now, I don't know, is that when things are out of their control, it'll feel like it's another factor in their inevitable abandonment of them, you know, that it's possible, it's kind of a long shot, that when she talks about this dissociative process, it's concerning to him, which would be normal. But this anxiety is quick to follow, which is, well, what if she dissociates or she goes into that thing and then she leaves me, or she forgets about me, or it causes conflict and we get in a fight and then she leaves me. That's the preoccupied curse, really. Is like everything, it comes back to that, is how is this going to result in me inevitably going to be abandoned? Because everything leads back to that, right? So it's possible that that's what's happening right now. And even though he doesn't really know what he's being told, he's like, he wants to get his hands around it, right? Because he's worried about that. So he says, is there anything I can do to help? And then when she's like, yeah, not really, which is, for now anyway, that's probably the best thing to say. That there's not more that needs to be said. And he should be able to say, oh, okay, well, if there's anything I can ever do, let me know. That would be the non-preoccupied response, I think, depending on how he's interpreting things. So I think that might be happening. I wish that they had a professional there that would talk with them. I get the sense that she has recovered a lot and she's managed well, but there are signs, and it would be totally normal, even if she had been through wall-to-wall therapy since she was 17, because she's 27, so max like 10 years of therapy, which I'm guessing hasn't happened. The amount of trauma that she I don't know if you caught that, but she says that there's childhood memories. She has that kind of connected to the dissociation thing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if she has some pretty classic trauma recovery ahead of her, which would be totally understandable. And it takes a long time to do that. So I say all this because there are signs that she has a lot of self-awareness. And if she just came up with that herself, which is possible given that I haven't heard her refer to any sort of therapy that she's been through, then amazing. But even if with the assistance of therapy, she has built up this self-awareness and built a very functional life compared to her own parents, right? That's also great. But I say all this because in all likelihood, there's a lot of therapy left, and possibly for him too. I want to be clear that in all likelihood, the cast members of this show, of all the seasons, and this one included, have had similar, if not greater, issues, but they just didn't talk about it because they hadn't recovered enough, or they just didn't want to talk about it on camera. So the way that I see Alex and Madison is not some anomaly. It's not this strange situation. It's strange that they're talking about it is what's strange. It's totally normal. And, in a lot of ways, the two of them seem like the most healthiest, most attachment healthy and, people on this show ever, right? And yet they have all these issues. So what does that tell us? It might mean that a lot of people, just think about other people from previous seasons, like your Jeremys and your Hannahs. If they had graduated to a certain point, hopefully they'd be able to talk about this stuff because something's going on with them, right? So I want that contrast to be stated.
Well, I think that's really the only thing that maybe is scary for me. Is that it's not, if there's nothing I can do, then it's out of my control, and then it's kind of like a wild card.
It's interesting how, I don't know if I'm just shoving it into my if I'm forcing what he's saying into the hypothesis that I mentioned, but it does fit what he just said.
Don't think that you would notice it. It's not like I just disappeared.
So it's interesting. I don't usually get a chance to talk about dissociation. It's common, and it's not something that's talked about very much. And there are different forms of it. And listen to my deep dive on dissociation. I go over the different forms and talk about the main form that I treat that I don't even see in it. Well, it is considered one of the non-specified dissociation, even though it's one of the main ones that I've seen. But anyway, so yeah, for now, this is good that she can just say this. Look, it's not likely to affect anything, but it probably does. Because, for example, and especially in this relationship, if she were to get triggered and she were to dissociate, if I understand what she's talking about, which I don't know, typically what that would look like from the outside is that she's fine. There's nothing noticeable about her unless you were really aware of the different states. It's not like she would just be comatose. She would be talking and walking and, doing taxes, whatever she's doing, everything would appear normal. But she would be emotionally distant and hard to reach. And her responses would be brief, but not that noticeably brief. But it would feel, if you're like him and you're sensitive to rejection and distance, then it could very easily be interpreted as rejection, as distance, as purposeful coldness, when it wasn't, right? So down the line, if they do end up together, if I understand the situation right, they would benefit from having that nuance. But for now, even if she knows all this and it is true, there's nothing wrong with her saying, I think you'd misunderstand. I'm just telling you something that I go through. It's not likely to affect anything.
I just kind of go into like an autopilot mode.
For the most part, like I'm fine with it, I think. It's hard because I don't really know, right? It's just like an unknown.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this might be his growing edge, as we call it. He's exhibited a fair amount of awareness. And I think right now he might be experiencing that preoccupied worry that I was mentioning earlier, but he doesn't know that's what he's experiencing. And he is bumping up against that uncertainty and that lack of power, that lack of control, as he was saying, and not realizing, this is me assuming that without control over this, that I'll be abandoned. So I need to do some self-talk and say that that's not the case. I can be I'm out of control of a lot of things, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to be abandoned.
I mean, there's lots of unknowns,
Yeah,
Can always be really sure about anything.
that's true.
At the end of the day, I think it just comes down to trust.
Yeah.
Like, how much do you trust that, I am an aware person, that I'm working on that I'm a resourced person.
She has used that phrase at least once before, resourced person. I haven't heard that phrase. I don't know if that's a phrase that other therapists would use, or if that's her own phrase, or if that's like a cultural phrase, like a TikTok trend or something. I don't know. But I like it. I think she's saying she has resources, she has tools and skills and knowledge and power, agency. She struggles and has resources to deal with it. She's not just completely flying blind.
That I can handle it. How much can you trust this connection? If we are moving forward in this, I want to know that you can trust me and not just hear me say something and get scared.
I also want to 2 thumbs up to Netflix, or to the production company, which is called Kinetic, I believe, because in the editing room, I would estimate that they have anywhere from 3,000 to 12,000 hours of footage from the pods alone. And they have to narrow it down to, I don't know how many episodes they're going to focus on in the pods, but it's typically 3 or 4 episodes. So they have to take, potentially, I don't know, let's say split the difference, 7,000, 8,000 hours of footage, and they have to reduce it down to 3 or 4 hours. And there's probably a lot of options, right? There's a lot of things that they could highlight. They could also just dip into this conversation, and that might be enough for what their purposes are, but they're giving us a lot of this footage. And I think a part of what I would imagine because there's not a lot of drama here. No one's yelling at each other. No one's sneaking up to someone and laughing at them, like Micah and Irina laughing at Amber. There's nothing like that. It's just 2 people talking about their traumas and working things out and being healthy. And at least for my purposes, I'm glad that they're doing it. The other thing I guess I should say, now that I think about it, is I wonder if someone in the audience would say that they're trauma bonding. And I will say that trauma bonding is not anything like trauma bonding is the same as Stockholm Syndrome. It's when you bond with the person that's traumatizing you. But the concept that is in culture is that people will bond over talking about their trauma. And I always say, what's wrong with that? I mean, if people have trauma, who cares why anyone would bond? And I think that it is a way of just further stigmatizing people. But also, might there be some rare situations where two people will pathologically overshare with other oversharers and they bond and only have a relationship around their traumas and amplify their traumas to be a part of their sort of mini cult that they identify as two traumatized individuals. Yeah, that's happened. I've treated people like this. I've been asked to try to extract people. It's sort of like a two-person cult that will go down these weird roads together. And I don't say anything like that here. So I think that the common trauma bonding accusation is just a tricky way of giving in to the stigma around people being vulnerable and talking about their emotions, honestly. All right, I want to remind everyone that there are fan-run forums to talk about psychology in Seattle and the things that we talk about. There's the subreddit and also the Facebook fan page. So those two places are, places where people can gather and talk about. I don't go there because I want people to feel like they can talk amongst themselves without affecting me either way. Sometimes Stacy will see something and will forward it to me, or Alina will also forward stuff to me. That's been vetted for my eyes. And so you can go there. Also, if you notice anyone impersonating me or you think someone's impersonating me, it'd be really great and a favor to me if you were to go to the website and email me through there, because that's really the only way to for sure get a hold of us, because we need to flag those people and get them, because sometimes people will they'll have my picture, they'll have my name, it'll look exactly, I don't know why, but on YouTube, anyone can create a channel that's called whatever they want and have whatever picture they want. And typically they're trying to sell you crypto. So just know that I'm never trying to sell you anything. I would never directly appeal along those lines. You know what I mean? So if you ever get that, and with AI, oh boy, eventually, and I know that this is happening to YouTubers actually, where AI deep faking, and if someone is concerned about, is this a scam? And then they will send a deep fake video to them saying, would be like of me saying, no, this is me and you, so-and-so, insert name, that I legitimately have a deal on crypto that I feel like you should have. So just know that, eventually I'm guessing people will learn the signs, but I'm worried that something like that is already happening. So if you ever see that, be wary, and also let me know so we can go after those people. I mean, some of those individuals are committing crimes and should be contacted by the police or something. So, let me know, because I feel what really gives me anxiety is people being harmed. And two, as a distant second, people, at least for a time, thinking that I would try to scam people with crypto or so. I don't know. Anyway, so watch out there. And along those lines, take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.